Welcome along this Saturday afternoon to Premier Christian Radio. Wherever you're listening, wherever you are, it's great to have you with me for the next hour and a half or so as we engage in some interfaith discussion. And on the programme today, got some really interesting guests for you. The first time, I think, that we've had three faiths represented in the studio. So let me tell you what's coming up on the programme today.
You're unbelievable.
Well, today on the programme, very pleased to have joining me in the studio not two but three guests, and they're all of different faiths. Mohammed Al-Hussaini is a fellow in Islamic studies at Leo Beck Rabbinical College. David Jackson is part-time Heathrow chaplain and former lecturer at London School of Theology. And Rabbi Mark Solomon is a lecturer in the Talmud, also at Leo Beck College. They are all involved in something called Scriptural reasoning. It's about looking at the different sacred texts of Islam, Judaism and Christianity, comparing them and coming to understanding. It's a fascinating process. We're going to be finding out about it on the show today and looking at some of the area, a particular area where we can look at the ways that different texts approach a particular issue. I hope you can join me right through till 4 o'clock this afternoon. Well, gentlemen, thank you all for joining me on the programme today. I think this may be one of the first times I've had three different faiths represented in the studio. It's normally just a Christian and a non-Christian of some faith or no faith, but it's a great pleasure to have all three of you represented on the programme today, so thank you for joining me. Mohammed, it was really through you, first of all, that this ball got rolling. So tell us a little bit about yourself and about scriptural reasoning.
As you can tell by my name, I'm from a Muslim family. I wouldn't say where my faith commitment is now, but I'm currently lecturer in Islamic studies, fellow in Islamic studies at a rabbinical college in North London. We've been doing with my friends from various faiths this practice of getting people in small groups from principally the three Abrahamic faiths from Christianity, Judaism and Islam, to meet together to study our scriptures and ground our conversation in our scriptures, and also ground our conversation in the understanding of difference. So unlike a lot of interfaith dialogue, which can turn into interfaith monologue, it's not so much about trying to find or force a consensus, but rather to understand our disagreements more deeply and to engender, as we say, better quality disagreement. I think Mark has a few reflections on the origins as an intra-Jewish practice of scriptural reasoning.
Yes, Mark, let's introduce you. You're a rabbi.
That's right. Yes.
And have you obviously grown up in a Jewish context?
I grew up in a Jewish family, very much so, in Australia, in Orthodox Judaism. I've since migrated, many years since, to liberal Judaism, which takes a much more liberal view about Scripture and the authority of Scripture and many other things. And I'm currently working mainly as an interfaith consultant for liberal Judaism, which is the movement that includes all the liberal synagogues throughout the UK.
Right. And so how did you come to be involved with scriptural reasoning?
Well, the short answer is through Mohammed, who's a good friend and colleague for several years now. And Mohammed has been one of the pioneers in this practice in the UK. I was also invited a few years ago to a one-day conference at St Ethelburga's Centre in the City of London to launch the practice of scriptural reasoning in London. This was a part of a process. Scriptural reasoning began probably in the 1990s in Princeton University in the United States, very much as an academic practice amongst Jews, then in conversation with Christians, and then bringing in Muslims, and operated very much on an academic level, dialogue between scholars who were experienced in the traditional ways of studying their religious texts, with commentaries, with learned analysis and so forth. This then migrated across the Atlantic to Cambridge University and became entrenched there also as an academic practice. And this was then brought to London as an idea, and since then it's undergone a bit of a metamorphosis and spread out to many groups around the UK, and Mohammed has been a great pioneer in this, so that it's no longer just amongst scholars and academics, although there is still very much room for that kind of scholarly study together, but as a practice that local communities can engage in. So, for instance, in the Westminster area, we have a very thriving scriptural reasoning group from local synagogues, mosques and churches, where people get together every 6 weeks or so and have an evening on a particular topic, with text presented by knowledgeable people, but not necessarily religious professionals. Could be knowledgeable lay people who are used to doing scriptural study, and just entering into dialogue on those texts. You said before comparing scriptures, and I suppose inevitably you do end up doing that. But the primary purpose is not to compare scriptures so much as to share in the process by which each religious community itself delves into its own scriptures, because we all have traditions of Torah study for Jews, which is a deep, devoted analysis of the text, bringing in many traditional commentaries, exploring the multifaceted nature of the biblical text, which is what Jews love to do.
Right.
And it's about others listening into that process and then gradually, gently feeling able to become part of it and enter into that conversation.
It sounds fascinating. Finally, our Christian guest on the programme today is David Jackson. David, would you like to give us a little brief summary of your life to date? Because I understand you've done an awful lot over the years. You've been a teacher, you've been a missionary. It sounds like you've had a lot of experience.
From 65 to 75, I taught at London Bible College, now called London School of Theology. Then I was a minister and worked in lay employment in Lancashire to pay my wage. After that, we went abroad for a few years, so worked in Brazil for 11 years and then in Sri Lanka for 2.5 years before returning to this country at the turn of the century. So we've been in Birmingham for 6 years and now back at London School of Theology, where my wife teaches.
Right.
She's Director of Practical Training, and we live on site. So in the apartment where we first began our married life 40 years before.
It's all come back around there.
Yes, a full circle. Yes.
That's interesting, isn't it? So how long have you, as it were, been engaged in interfaith sort of issues and dialogue?
Only for about 2 years. Again, it was through an email from Mohammed sent to the college as a circular letter that I first became aware of it and went down into London for the first meeting, enjoyed it, because I thought of interfaith meetings as either just concerned with practical things like refugees and asylum seekers, or else being a sort of relativist group where everyone agreed that, all the roads were the same. Whereas the phrase that Mohammed quoted earlier that's on the website, better quality disagreement, appealed to me.
Right.
Because you can learn what others feel. You don't feel that you're speaking into a vacuum in ignorance of their beliefs, and you're not assuming their beliefs. They tell you what their beliefs are from their own scriptures. And then the same courtesy is given to me, and I can explain the riches of the Bible, the spiritual depth, the spiritual power of the Bible, and so that's great.
Absolutely. It's it's one of those things where this programme specifically does very much engage in an interfaith kind of discussion, dialogue, and what many people have said they appreciate about the programme is that we don't, if you like, just say, well, we all ultimately believe the same thing and we can all get on and, the world can be a better place if everyone just agrees about everything. I think what people do appreciate about this programme is that we're honest about the points where we do part company, but we're also honest about the points where there is agreement. And I think that might be the concern, particularly perhaps among the evangelical Christian community, Mohammed, that this all sounds terribly wishy-washy, let's all get together and show how our texts all are ultimately about the same thing. And I think many Christians sometimes feel a bit concerned that your sort of interfaith dialogue can often actually equate to just sort of we're all the same type of theology. I mean, is that a kind of what something you're keen not to do? I mean, in the way that you approach this kind of a subject?
Well, certainly the challenge for the Muslim community is exactly that. Muslims remain deeply suspicious of any kind of interfaith engagement as essentially having an agenda to undermine difference and undermine those cherished differences of belief to which the community adhere very strongly. So I guess I would answer your listeners, particularly the evangelical community, that the proof is in the pudding. Among our leading members are people from a strongly and very committedly evangelical tradition. Our Scriptural Reasoning group at Oxford is based at the Centre for Muslim Christian Studies, which is headed up by my very, very dear friends, Dr. Ida Glaser, Dr. David Coffey, Dr. Martin Whittingham, who come from a very strong heritage of evangelical outreach, missionary outreach to the Muslim community. And for all of us, what is very striking about Scriptural Reasoning is whereas a lot of people from my community, as much as from a conservative or charismatic evangelical tradition, wouldn't be seen dead at a liberal interfaith type gathering, we're very keen to talk about our faith, and we're very keen to talk about our scripture. People will come to study the Bible, people will come to read the Islamic texts, and it's out of that commitment to Scripture and commitment to not holding back from our differences that Scriptural Reasoning really has something to offer.
And how does a session take place? Is it a large group, a small group? Does it take place with just everyone coming along with their Bible or Quran or the Talmud or whatever it may be, and then just open it up and start to discuss, or is there more structure to it than that?
Well, we've experimented with a range of different approaches within the Oxford group because it is primarily Christian or evangelical dialogue with Muslims. There's a particular structure that Ida has developed on the basis of her many years of work. Within our groups here in London and up in Edinburgh, we've found a useful way is because of our commitment to Scriptural Reasoning as an egalitarian practice, we want to make the text accessible to people who come from a lay background and not just for academics and clergy. So it's quite helpful to introduce the texts, to have people who have some understanding of the text, who have prepared the text, to introduce them briefly. But thereafter, it's very much up for grabs, and we don't hold back from very frank exchanges around disagreement. We believe that these disagreements can be held within the context of honesty, and through that engendering friendships across boundaries of disagreement. So that's very much our ethos in this respect. One point to bear in mind also is that it is extremely difficult to get Muslims to come to the table in interfaith dialogue, and we've had to really sort of bend over backwards to try and win over this very conservative community. We had a fatwa issued to make it kind of halal. We've tried to also engage Orthodox Jewish authorities in trying to win over the possibility of more conservative Jews coming to the table. And likewise, our commitment to respecting evangelical concerns about not undermining differences are very much part of what we're about.
I mean, you have already defined yourself, Mark, as being, if you like, in the liberal camp, if you like, as far as Judaism is concerned. Is this kind of study and dialogue the kind of thing that an Orthodox Jew would be willing to participate in, do you think?
At times, Orthodox Jews will. In the particular group that I'm most involved in, I have to say we haven't been able yet to attract any Orthodox Jews to take part. In principle, there are Orthodox Jews who would do so, and I know Muhammad has close friends who identify as Orthodox who are very keen on this practice. I think part of the question would be how orthodox, because there are any number of gradations, as in most religions, and about how people define themselves and what approaches they take. So while I know that for many Jews, Orthodox Jews, studying the Quran with Muslims is relatively uncontroversial, because the Quran is seen as rigidly monotheistic in the way that Judaism sees itself, some Orthodox Jews would have a real issue about settling down to serious study of the New Testament, because they have many serious questions about how monotheistic Christianity is, because the worship of Jesus as the Son of God, for many Jews, is sort of compromises the monotheistic nature of Christianity. So for those who are worried about that, there could be a real issue getting to serious grips with the New Testament. I personally don't have that problem, and I know that there are Orthodox Jews on the liberal wing of orthodoxy, let's say, who can also perceive the deep monotheism within Christianity, albeit a slightly different sort of monotheism from that which Jews and Muslims espouse, because of the emphasis on the Holy Trinity, and therefore are able to take part in that study in a spirit of deep respect as well.
And I can imagine some Christians or Muslims or Jews saying, well, even if I went along, it's not going to change my mind about the things I believe. So what's the point? In a sense, you have your belief and I have my belief, and they're different. And doesn't he's going to talking about it and highlighting the fact that we do believe different things really going to change anything?
I think there are probably at least two major motivations that bring people into this kind of shared study and interfaith experience. One is, I think, just a curiosity, a real desire to understand the other, a sense that in the world in which we live, the sort of mixed communities in which we live, with all the potential for conflict, and sometimes actual conflict, it's important to get an understanding of the other. Nowadays, of course, for all of the reasons everybody will know in the background of the last few years, people are very curious about Islam, about the Quran. They hear so much prejudiced rhetoric about the evils of Islam, the evils of the Quran, and somehow sense that can't be the whole story, that can't really be true, but need to engage in this kind of shared study to see for themselves that it is possible to conduct a peaceful, respectful dialogue with Muslims, and to get a little glimpse, because that's all it really is, of the beauty within the Quran, its style and its teaching, and so that's the first motivation, and I think that leads in. I've already more or less brought into the second one, which is the determination a lot of people have to build peace, to build harmonious relations with people of other religions, not to perpetuate the conflicts of the past, but through knowledge and understanding to try to create a more peaceful world. And I think for many people that's a really important aim of this kind of dialogue. And it's through understanding that peace can come.
We'll just take a very brief break there, gentlemen, as we give out the ways people can get in touch. If you're listening and you'd like to comment on what you're hearing today about interfaith dialogue, I wonder if you've come across any similar kind of thing to scriptural reasoning. Or what do you think of actually sitting down with different holy texts side by side and contrasting them in this way? Do you think that's a helpful thing to do? Very much interested in your responses. You can email me unbelievable@premier.org.uk. You can also get through via the phone line, leave me a voicemail message. That's 08456 52 52 52 and select option 5 to leave me a voicemail message. You can get hold of this programme at premier.org.uk/unbelievable. Now, I should also mention that one of our guests, namely Mohammed, is going to be taking part in a special event called Persecuted Christians and Imam's Perspective. So Sheikh Dr. Mohammed Al-Hussaini will be speaking at St. Augustine's Church. That's on Monday, the 24th of August, 2009 at 6:30 p.m. That's St. Augustine's Church, 117 Queensgate, London. If you want to find out more, go to Nested, that's nested.org.uk. Not specifically in his role for scriptural reasoning, just an event that Mohammed will be appearing at soon. That's Monday the 24th of August, 6:30 p.m, St. Augustine's Church, 117 Queensgate, London. Let's get back to our debate and see what our other guests have to say.
Unbelievable with Justin Brierley.
David, as a Christian minister and a Bible teacher for a long time. You obviously know the Bible very well. What's been your experience, though, in the last couple of years of actually engaging alongside the Quran and the Jewish texts that has been valuable as far as you're concerned?
Two values. One is understanding, instead of just imagining, how Muslims and Jews interpret their scriptures. But of course there are many different parties and sects among the Muslims and Jews also, and they would interpret them in different ways. So it's good to understand how some parties interpret, instead of just imagining for oneself and saying you believe this or you believe that and being completely wrong about it. And then the other great advantage is to be able to expound the Christian scriptures in an atmosphere of courtesy and attentiveness. Disagreeing, yes, but listening and trying to understand. And the Muslims and Jews listen and try to understand just as I do for them. I would say, though, that if an evangelical Christian wanted to go along to one of these groups, they should have a good grasp of their faith and be certain that they have a good grasp of their faith before they go, because they will meet many different ideas, some very foreign to them, and some also from members of their own faith, because there are many different approaches within Christianity. And so it's essential, I think, not only to have a good grasp of your own faith, but to have a lot of patience as well.
Sure.
And not to react to things that you think are completely wrong with just shock, but to be able to think about them and to bring evidence and arguments for your interpretation of the Scripture as well.
And has any of the discussions that you've had kind of caused you to rethink any of your positions on the Bible? Would you say that your ground has changed at all, having had these kinds of discussions?
No. I hope you're not expecting me to say yes.
No, I'm not in that sense.
No, it hasn't. No.
Yeah,
in fact, I've been deepened in my own faith.
Yeah, but certainly your appreciation of what the other texts have to say has obviously grown a great deal.
Yes, it has. Yes, indeed.
In that. I mean, so what's the overall hope then in for scriptural reasoning, Mohammed? Do you see it as being something that can really make a difference in terms of Christian, Muslim, and Jewish relationships?
Well, I think, again, the evidence is witnessed in the friendships that have been built across boundaries of very strong disagreement. I think also a number of different agendas will be around the table. People will come to scriptural reasoning groups for different reasons. One of the key motivations with the fatwa, just speaking from an Islamic point of view, was to make scriptural reasoning an acceptable Islamic practice. It's been seen as essentially, prior to that, a foreign practice that comes from outside the tradition. The idea was to try and own it for our community as a halal practice. And in the course of that, just picking up on what David said, a key motivation was to win over the Muslim community to scriptural reasoning by presenting the idea that it might actually give you a closer appreciation of your own tradition by seeing it in relief to others, by understanding where the common ground lies, but also seeing where the sharp differences lie. And it is out of that motivation for a deeper understanding of one's own faith tradition that many people come to the table, but they stay for the friendships.
Sure. I mean, I'm sure, though, that not all Muslims are in agreement. I mean, in fact, I spoke to one just recently and I mentioned I was doing a programme on this scriptural reasoning, and he said, oh, yes, I've heard of that. They're very liberal, yes. He says. And that may be the assumption, then, that if you're going to be involved in this as a Muslim, you've got to be a certain type of Muslim. Is that fair?
Well, I mean, the authorities that have issued the fatwa come from probably the most hardline and conservative Saudi Wahhabist tradition. We have really dug deep into probably the most traditional sources of Islamic law in order to draft and to produce this document. The idea is really to ensure that a very large part of the normal distribution curve from liberal to highly conservative, a very large proportion of that normal distribution curve are able to take on board this practice as being something that's, reasonably kosher.
And is there a sense in which there is an evangelistic aim? I mean, in a sense, obviously everyone who goes to it, if they believe that to follow Christianity or Islam or Judaism is the best path, then obviously they will be keen to convince that other people. But do you have any kind of rules of no, this isn't a place where we're trying to convert anyone, or do you accept that people do have an ultimate aim, which is that obviously if you feel your religion is truly the one that brings life and everything, that people should be free to proselytise in that sense?
Well, one of the key canons of our Oxford School, if you like, practice of scriptural reasoning is not to introduce fourth positions to the practice, namely anything that is over and above or tries to create rules that are beyond what Christianity teaches, Islam teaches, Judaism teaches. But at the same time, we recognise that different faiths will have different viewpoints in regard to proselytisation. I, as a Muslim, on a personal basis, have always had a very strongly constrained view about the view of proselytization within an interfaith setting. Other Muslims don't feel that, and so within the context of the Oxford group, for example, being an evangelical group with a heritage of missionary outreach, that motivation is held within the group.
Sure.
I think certainly where people from the Jewish faith are present, as a courtesy to them, this might need to be borne in mind. But at the same time, as David has rightly said, if there is a context for giving reasons for the hope that you have within you with gentleness and respect, it's the committed, devotional, respectful study of our most precious scriptures together. And I think that's one of the gifts that scriptural reasoning brings to the table. Because we have such precious sacred material in our presence, the temptation to shout or polemicize is very much constrained. We are in a very divine presence, and that's something that I think is quite important for SR.
Well, we're going to do some scriptural reasoning shortly. If you want more information about scriptural reasoning, and then do check out the website scripturalreasoning.org.uk. But we're going to be looking at the subject, just one that we've chosen for today, humility and probity in leadership, looking at a selection of Jewish texts, Christian texts and Islamic texts on that particular area. And so we'll just get a sense of how our guests interact on this particular area as the course of the programme continues. So do join me again in just a couple of minutes' time here on Unbelievable as we continue to look at this scriptural reasoning process, and particularly in regard to one theme, leadership, in just a moment's time on the programme where Christians and non-Christians talk. You're listening to Unbelievable.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
Welcome back as we continue to discuss scriptural reasoning here on Unbelievable. And I've given you the web address and obviously more information available at premier.org.uk/unbelievable alongside this programme where you can download it as a podcast. Mark, what's your perspective when it comes to the motivation for scriptural reasoning, for being involved in this process?
I think I'd have to say for myself personally, and I can't speak for anybody else, Jewish or otherwise, in this, that I do come to it with the hope and the confidence, in a way, that it will do something for my personal spirituality, that it will, in effect, have a transformative effect on me. This isn't something I've just been doing the last couple of years under this present label of scriptural reasoning. I've been deeply engaged for many, many years, my whole career, first in shared Jewish and Christian study of the Old and New Testaments through organisations like the Council of Christians and Jews and the London Society of Jews and Christians, of which I'm co-chairman as well, and really delving into our shared Bible and the New Testament. And with a profound commitment on my part that there is truth, not only in the Hebrew Scriptures, but in the New Testament as well. And whenever I study the New Testament seriously with Christians, I'm always deeply moved by the insight that comes with deep study of how Jewish the New Testament is, and how much, although it's not part of the mainstream Jewish tradition, how much it is part of the evolution of Judaism in ancient times, in the time of the apostles. And similarly, when I first came to sharing study with Muslims in the early 1990s, mainly in conferences in Germany, for me and for many Jews who have done this, and Muslims as well, I think, it's had a really quite dramatic transformative effect. And part of that comes through language. Part of the emphasis when we do scriptural reasoning is not just looking at translations, but at least acknowledging, as much as those present are capable of, the underlying languages of Hebrew in the Hebrew Scriptures, of Arabic in the Quran, reading, hearing the original language, and being able, with the more scholarly people present, to delve into the nuances of words that are not always reflected in translation. And when Jews do that with the Quran and get a little glimpse of the Arabic, they're always struck by the deep similarities, the kinship between Hebrew and Arabic, and the way in which you can come to appreciate so much more of the sacred text through hearing the original and delving into it, rather than just dealing with often opaque translations.
Well, at this point, I think I'll sort of hand over to you, gentlemen, because you're the ones who do this on a regular basis, and I'm happy to listen. But I have in front of me some Jewish texts, which I would equally kind of, in a sense, describe as Christian, because obviously they're part of the Old Testament, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Nehemiah, but then texts from the New Testament, Gospel of Mark, 1 Peter and Philippians, and then some texts from the Quran. And these are all to do with leadership, humility and probity in leadership. So where would you begin with this? I'll allow any of you to begin. Perhaps.
I think we often, not always, but often go in a sort of chronological order.
Okay.
So it's Hebrew Bible, New Testament and Quran. Occasionally we vary that for one reason or another. But I'm happy to kick off in this programme. It was David, a credit to David here, who chose this particular theme of leadership, so topical in our country at this time, with all sorts of questions about humility and probity of leaders. And so then Muhammad and I set about finding texts in our scriptures that we felt would contribute to this discussion. Three Hebrew Bible or Old Testament texts here. Exodus and Deuteronomy are, of course, part of what Jews call the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the most sacred and most inspired part of the Bible in Jewish tradition, and also the best known, because we read from it, the whole of it, in the course of a year, and study these texts constantly. And whereas the third one here, which I do want to touch on, Nehemiah, is very much among the byways of the Bible, I suspect for Christians as much as Jews, one of the probably least studied and least known books of the Hebrew Bible. But as we'll see, it has some real treasures within it as well. But first I'll very quickly take us through the Torah texts.
Do so.
Exodus chapter 18 deals with an episode in the life of Moses. The Israelites have recently had the exodus from Egypt, been liberated by God's power from Egyptian slavery, and Moses and the Israelites are just finding their way as a new community in the wilderness, and they receive a visit from Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. And it's very significant in Jewish tradition that the teaching that comes here comes not from a Jewish source, but from a, as it were, a non-Israelite source, the priest of Midian, who first acknowledges God's power in liberating the Israelites from slavery. And then he's sitting watching how Moses is leading the people. Moses, quite a new leader at this time. And he sees that everybody's bringing their problems to Moses, their disputes, their court cases. Moses is dealing with everything and sitting from morning till night dealing with all of the disputes and questions and cases that come up. And Jethro says to him, what you are doing is not good. You'll wear out, the people will wear out, the whole thing will collapse if you continue to take so much on your own shoulders. And so he gives him advice about how to delegate leadership, how to appoint judges. So this is the very short text here, Exodus 18, verse 21 and 22. I'll just read a little bit of the Hebrew so your listeners can hear it. Va'ata techezeh mikol ha'am anshe chayil yirei Elohim anshe emet son'ei vatsa. So you, says Jethro to Moses, you look for, seek out from among all the people. Anshe chayil is translated here as able men, but that doesn't really convey the depth of the word chayil. It's the same word you get in the book of Proverbs, a woman of worth who can find, or a woman of valor. So chayil can mean valor, bravery, courage, worth, substance, all of those sorts of things. So men of substance, men of courage, or we might want to say people of courage if we're going to be more gender inclusive, but I don't think they had that in mind in this particular episode. From amongst all of the people. So there are no limitations here, no particular caste or tribe from which leaders come. It can be from all the people. Yirei Elohim, those who fear God. And this is one of the central phrases. All the three Hebrew Bible texts we're going to look at briefly today include this concept of fearing God, which of course doesn't mean being afraid of God or being afraid of hellfire or punishment, but rather a deep sense of awe of God, a deep reverence and respect. To me, what fear of God really means is a sense of proportion about one's own place in the universe, not seeing oneself as the centre of everything, but understanding that God is the centre and the source of everything. And then it goes on, Anshe Emet, literally men of truth, trustworthy men, Sonei Vatsa, who hate gain, who hate bribery, as it's often translated. And so we have four terms here for the kind of people who should be set over others in a position of leaders or judges. People of substance, who fear God, who are trustworthy people, and who hate bribery or illicit gain. And I think here are summed up in these four. This is quite a poetic passage. If you listen to the Hebrew, it has a poetic shape to it in the sounds of the words. But in this poetry is contained one of the supreme lessons about the nature of proper leadership, to judge the people b'chol eit, at all times. They should always be ready to do this.
I wish we had more time to sort of go through everything in detail, but I know that we're in the context, obviously, of a scriptural reasoning session. You'd know, be able to draw out things, and I'm only sorry that on this program we'll have to kind of shorten things a little bit. But if like the second two passages, what sort of sentiment do they express in
once again, Deuteronomy 17 contains the laws about the king. If the people, when they come to the land, decide to appoint a king, like all other nations, there's a bit of criticism there about kings, which we know from elsewhere in the Bible, but there too it emphasizes the king is not above the law, but beneath the law, subject to the law. The king shall write for himself a copy of the law, and it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God. Once again, this fundamental need for reverence for God, being conscious that God is above you, by keeping all the words of this law. And then it goes on in verse 20, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers. Leadership is not being above everybody else. It's about serving, and I think this is going to come out even more strongly in the New Testament texts. But it's very clear here, and one of the commentators said, we learn here the sin of pride. If even the king, who is after all the king, is not allowed to have his heart lifted up over others, how much more does that apply to everybody else who don't have such a cause for arrogance? So here too, the emphasis on fearing God and not being arrogant over others. Then Nehemiah. Well, Nehemiah here is the governor of Judea, appointed by the Persian emperor in the 5th century before the Common Era. and he's defending his record as governor of Judea. And one of the points he makes here, and it's worth bearing in mind, that this was during a period of serious economic recession in Judea. The passage just before this describes the hardships of the people, their fields, their property mortgaged to the hilt to the wealthy, and Nehemiah steps in and takes measures to relieve poverty, to get the wealthy to release all the mortgages and the debts that they're holding over people. But then he says in Nehemiah chapter 5, this is verse 14, if anyone wants to look it up, he says, "During all the years I was governor, neither I nor my brothers, his fellow officials, ate the food allowance of the governor." In other words, yes, there were allowances due. The next verse tells us it was 40 shekels of silver a day. That was a lot of money for the upkeep of the governor's household. But no, he says, I didn't take the expense allowances. And why? Why does he say? "But I did not do so because of the fear of God."
Yeah,
Once
very
again,
apposite.
This concept of the reverence for God, which means you're conscious of your true role, your true position, and you don't take advantage of the taxpayers in order to subsidize your lifestyle.
Very interesting. So how would you build on that or approach that from in terms of some New Testament text, David?
Well, the New Testament text that I've chosen as the basis is Mark chapter 10 and verses 42 to 45. The disciples were very ordinary people, and as in any group of ordinary people, you sometimes get personality clashes, you get jealousies, and on more than one occasion they quarrelled about which one of them was the most effective, which one of them was the most important. And on this occasion in Mark they had been quarrelling because two of them wanted to set themselves above all the rest. And Jesus says here, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So Jesus turns the ordinary upside down. There are many people who want to be leaders in the church, leaders in society. But to exercise a leadership that is combined with being a servant, or a slave, as it means in the original, not very many people want to do that. And there are two other passages that I have here, but I won't read them in full. One is from Peter's first letter, chapter 5, and the other is from Paul's letter to the Philippians in chapter 2. Now, in Peter's letter, he's talking to the leaders in the church, and he tells them that they should not lord it over the people who are entrusted to you, but be examples to the flock. And at the end of the little passage here, he says, "All of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble." And then in Philippians chapter 2, the very well-known passage about the self-humbling and sacrifice of Jesus, Paul says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves." And he goes through the whole account of how Jesus humbled himself, and then at the end of the passage in verse 13, he tells the people to be obedient because it is God who is working inside you, both to will and to act according to his good purpose. So there are reasons then why we should be servants as well as leaders, and at the same time. One is that God commands it, because God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Another reason is that God has accepted us in spite of our sinfulness and all our offences against him, so then we should accept one another. And a third is that God has behaved like this himself. The Son of Man, said Jesus, didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And Paul picks that up in Philippians chapter 2. Jesus humbled himself even to death on a cross. So there's the example for us, to think of others as better than ourselves and not to look just to our own interests, but to the interests of others. And then the fourth reason is that God is at work inside us to transform us to be more like Jesus and more like God's character himself. God is at work inside us both to want to do it and to give us the strength to do it, to will and to act. Well, now, of course, the church has often fallen short. Leaders have not always been servants. When the powerful and the educated converted and came into the church, people tended to choose those as leaders, and they didn't sort of abandon their previous attitudes. In fact, the Romans liked to boast a lot. Somebody said that humility was something that came crawling out of the Judean desert. The Romans didn't have a humility as part of their concept of public office. And even today in the church, I mean, when you think that there are 30,000 and more Christian denominations, some very much opposed to one another and arguing against one another, a lot of it is because of personality clashes. New denominations arise not because God has told them to arise, but because people can't get on with others. So they go off and found their own church. But unfortunately, that's because we're sinful human beings, isn't it? Like G.K. Chesterton said, Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and sometimes not even tried. And this should have an effect on politics too. Social leaders as well as church leaders. And if a Christian becomes a leader in society, then he doesn't behave in a different way than he does when he's a leader in the church. He doesn't live in watertight compartments. And so if this teaching of the New Testament was really taken to heart, then it would remove certain negative qualities that we sometimes see in politicians. Some sometimes appear boastful, saying that, they and their policies are the only ones. They appear arrogant, pompous, contemptuous of other people, trying to put other people down and making them feel small. They appear sometimes face-saving. They appear sometimes very evasive and truth-hiding. When they're asked a question, they give a multiplicity of words and sentences to try to obscure what the truth really is, rather than acknowledging the truth, even if it harms their particular career or their particular policy. Some of them sometimes appear grasping for money. Some sometimes appear power-hungry. None of these qualities are characteristic of a true servant, and none of these qualities are compatible with what Jesus and Peter and Paul tell us leadership should be like.
Finally, Mohammed, do you want to sort of bring the verses to bear that you feel speak to this particular issue?
Indeed, yes. Thanks very much, Justin. I mean, within the context of a scriptural reasoning meeting with the time, which is obviously not present in this context, there would be the space for the interaction and the response, so that a Jewish and a Christian or an Islamic hermeneutic would be reflected back through the eyes of Christians and Jews and Muslims reading other people's texts.
Of course, what we're doing today is quite different in a sense. But what we'll have is, just in the last section of this programme, in the next 6 minutes or so, Mohammed, if you'd like to bring out from your text what you feel they speak to this, and then we'll use the final 10 or 15 minutes to bring some of that discussion out as the way you've perceived each other's reading.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, echoing very much some of the sentiments that have been expressed before. I've tried to bring some Islamic texts that relate to this issue. Quite often you'll find in scriptural reasoning that the themes don't actually cross text boundaries. So there's relatively little material in the Quran specifically on servant leadership, and most ideas of Islamic leadership come as a historically post-Quranically. But here in the story, in the Exodus narrative, such as it's there in the Quran, there's a very clear paradigm of a very bad leader, which is Pharaoh. And this verse that I'm going to read to you from the 43rd chapter, Surah Az-Zukhruf, verses 51 to 53, is very oft quoted in the political context of the current world situation as an example of an arrogant leader that lords it over others. I'll read you a bit of the Arabic first, as it's kind of very much part of our tradition, and Muslims do believe that the Quran only exists in its original language. وَنَدَى فِرْعَوْنَ في قومه قال يا قومي أليس لي ملك مصر وهذه الأنهار تجري من تحتي أفلا تبصرون أم أنا خير من هذا الذي هو محين ولا يكاد يبين فلو ألقي عليه أسوار من ذهب أو جاء معه الملائكة مقتربين. Pharaoh called to his people, saying, "My people, does the kingdom of Egypt not belong to me? Do not all these rivers flow under my control? Do you then not see? Am I not better than this man," referring to Moses, "who is contemptible and can scarcely make anything clear?" This is a reference to Moses' complaint to God that he does not have the gift of eloquence. Why have gold bracelets not been put upon his arms, and why is there not a train of angels accompanying him? Echoing this is another chapter of the Quran, Surah 26, verses 23 to 29, where Pharaoh asks Moses, "What is the Lord of the worlds?" And he, Moses, replies, "The Lord of the heavens and the earth, and everything between them, if you knew for sure." He, Pharaoh, said to those around him, "Are you listening?" He, Moses, replied, "Your Lord and the Lord of your forefathers, the previous peoples." He, Pharaoh, said, "This messenger whom you have sent, who has been sent to you, is mad." He, Moses, said, "The Lord of the east and the west and everything between them, if you but used your intellect." And he, Pharaoh, said, "If you take any god other than me, I will certainly throw you into prison." Now, within the context, as I say, of the scriptural reasoning meeting, we have a variety of different approaches to the reading of the text. So, for example, for Christians, quite often there will be a calling down of the Holy Spirit as an interpretative agency, and it will be through that indwelling spirit that the text speaks to a believing Christian. For Muslims, as much, and I do believe for Jews as well, an important part of our heritage of scriptural reading is a reverence for a received oral tradition. So in the case of Muslims, there is a tradition, there are a number of traditions, but certainly a predominating tradition is a view that it is the Prophet and his companions and their sayings in regard to what a particular verse means and its interpretation that is the position by which the Muslim community are bound.
Is this what's known as the Hadiths?
That's right, exactly. The Hadith comes, as you doubtless know, from the word to mean literally sort of chat. It's chat. It's what did the Prophet say in this particular context? And these Hadith form the basis for our received tradition of interpretation. So the idea of tradition as an instrument for reading is something that we bring to the table, but it's after having brought it to the table, then everything else is up for grabs. So I'm going to use a traditional commentary which comes from the early 900s by one of our great commentators, At-Tabari, who compiles traditions. And his view is that...
Let me, before you do
Sure.
that, we'll just take a quick break, and
Certainly.
then we'll come back with that commentary on that text, and that will be great to hear. And then we'll be able to engage in a bit of discussion on the whole issue as we've heard it from the different texts. You're listening to something a little bit different this week on Unbelievable, as we have kind of an interactive Bible study almost, but with several different holy texts represented here. And it is what's called scriptural reasoning, not quite the way that it's done in practice, of course. This is within the constraints of a radio show. But my guests today are a Christian, a Muslim and a Jew. And with the different texts, we're looking at how they speak to each other and where we may stand on this issue of leadership and humility. And so do join me again in just a short moment as we continue this discussion. And we'll be bringing some of your feedback from previous week's programming. Welcome back to the programme. If you're around next week between 2:30 and 4 here on Premier Radio, you're going to be hearing a discussion between atheist Barry Duke of the Freethinker magazine and Tom Price, a Christian, a young up-and-coming apologist with the Damaris Trust. He's at the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. They will be discussing the question, does religion make people unhappy? So quite an open-ended one, that. Hope you can join me for that at the same time next week, as usual, 2:30 till 4 o'clock, and online at premier.org.uk/unbelievable. And don't forget to get in touch as well. That's unbelievable at premier.org.uk. For the moment, it's back to the show in hand.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
Well, time to start to draw this programme to a close. Fascinating to hear about the discussions that go on a regular basis with the Scriptural Reasoning organisation and the practice that they put it together with. We've been hearing Mohammed just at the last section of the programme giving us readings from the Quran, which really relates to the exodus, actually, of the Jewish people, but in regard to how we might view leadership. And as you were explaining, Mohammed, it's very much about coming to understand how each tradition interprets its scripture. And obviously what many people may be unaware of who haven't really engaged in this kind of thing is that Islam does very much involve looking at the history of interpretation, these hadith,
indeed, yes.
These commentaries, if you like, on the Quran that have been passed down by historical figures in Islam. And so when you choose one particular person's commentary
Yes.
To look at these verses that you just read out, what criteria do you use? Would that depend to some extent on which branch of Islam you follow, whether you're a Shia Muslim, Sunni Muslim, and other things as well?
Absolutely. I think there's a number of different traditions of interpretation, and each have their own vast oceans of commentary. What is very striking, however, and surprising for Christian listeners in particular, is that whereas many medieval commentators in the Christian tradition are largely a subject of esoteric academic study in universities and academies, for both the Islamic and also for the Jewish tradition, the reading of classical commentators such as Rashi or Rambam from the Jewish tradition, or a Tabari or a Zamakhshari or al-Jalalain from an Islamic tradition, these commentators that have written many centuries before, is still something that's part of our devotional life.
In a way that you wouldn't find in the Christian church, David. You wouldn't. It's not typical to get people getting out their copy of Origen or, some early church father when it comes to interpreting the Bible. Most Christians would only be bringing a Bible into church or into their Bible study, wouldn't they?
Oh, I'm not sure. I think that many Christians would use commentaries in their daily devotions.
Well, that's true,
but
yeah.
they would be modern commentaries rather than ancient commentaries. But the modern commentaries build upon what has been written in the past. And
That's
so
true.
what Augustine wrote, or what Anselm wrote, or Luther or Calvin, could be incorporated in modern commentaries, but expressed now in modern English and easy to understand.
Sure. But not given, in a sense, the place that the hadiths are given, I'm guessing, in Islam, where they are very much seen as part of that sacred text kind of tradition. But yes, just do give us the interpretation that you would feel fits these passages.
Well, for reasons of time, why don't I give you an interpretation on just one of on the very last verse, which is a single verse, because within the Islamic tradition, quite often a single verse is the subject of an extensive text study session. This last verse is from the second chapter of the Quran, chapter 2, verse 188, and it picks up upon this issue of probity. And do not eat up your property among yourselves for vanity, nor use it as a bait or bribery for the judges, with intent that you may eat up wrongfully and knowingly a little of other people's property. So, for example, a commentary such as At-Tabari's would list a number of different opinions, saying such and such a person says, such and such a person says, such and such a person, linking a tradition back to the mouth of either the Prophet or his companions, to the effect, for example, that this indicates that even if a judge has ruled that a property that a plaintiff claims to be his own is his, if it turns out that it is being judged wrongfully, then God will be the ultimate judge over this matter. So the ruling of a secular authority in regard to what is right, secular law, human fallible judgment, is nothing by the standards of the incomparable justice of God. So this would be an example of how Muslims would obtain both a literal reading and also a moral tropological reading alongside the core literal reading. But as we say, it would be quite instructive to have responses from the other traditions, from my dear friends, in regard to the texts that have been presented today.
Shall we start with Mark as a rabbi? How you respond to both what David brought out in the New Testament and Muhammad in
Thanks,
in
Justin.
the Quran.
Yeah, I was very struck by the way in which, in the New Testament text that David led us through, the concept of humility in leadership is linked back to Jesus and Jesus' humility. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And then, of course, the famous Philippians passage about Jesus emptying himself and taking on the form of the humble form. And going through my mind was a famous passage from the Talmud, a saying of one of the greatest ancient rabbis, who very much part of the way we study the Bible as well, through the ancient rabbis, our equivalent of church fathers or hadith. So Rabbi Yochanan, who lived in Palestine in the 3rd century, says, and this is a saying that many devout Jews read towards the end of every Sabbath, it's in the prayer book, wherever you find the greatness of God mentioned in Scripture, there in the same passage you will find the humility of God mentioned. And he goes on and gives quotations from the 3 major sections of the Bible, the Torah, the prophets and the writings, to show that God is described as supremely great, majestic, but always also as humble, concerned with the least and lowliest of people, and present with every person. And so I think that's, in a way, the way that Jewish tradition tries to deal with this concept of greatness and humility coinciding, and in following the ways of God, imitating God in our ethics, which is something I think all our religions encourage us to do. We see that imitating God means being humble. And then with the text from the Quran that Muhammad brought, there are so many echoes there in the description of Pharaoh, the archetypal unjust tyrant, constantly mentioned in the Quran in that way, and echoes of Isaiah and Ezekiel, who also describe Pharaoh, as the great crocodile, lying in the Jordan, saying, "I made this river. I am the Lord of everything I survey." And as he says to Moses in the Torah as well, "Who is this Lord that you're talking about?" So again, this denial of God, this rejection, which is the opposite of the fear of God, the acknowledgement of our true place in the universe, And so I think these themes of humility, being conscious of God, run through these texts in such a powerful way. It's very beautiful to see the common themes.
David, your response as a Christian then to the Islamic and the Jewish text that we heard.
Yes, the theme of humility in the New Testament is very much based on the Old Testament too, isn't it? Because the verse that Peter quotes, God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble, is a verse from the Proverbs, the book of Proverbs. And it's used not only by Peter, but also in the book of James. So humility is, in a sense, not just pleasing God by humbling ourselves before him, but, as Marcus said, imitating God. Paul in Romans points out that God is long-suffering, that he doesn't jump down our throats straight away when we sin. When society sins, he doesn't destroy them straight away. He is long-suffering. And that's an aspect of humility. Just as Jesus showed humility when he humbled himself and became a slave, obedient, even unto death, so God's character in general shows this aspect. And it comes out of the Old Testament, perhaps not quite as much as in the New Testament, but its roots are there in the Old Testament.
Mohammed, your responses to what we've heard, but also I suppose I want to get the feel as well, if someone were to come along to a scriptural reasoning, do the themes that you pick, do you find generally a lot of broad agreement, or do you find that there are actually sometimes significant differences in the way that the different faiths would approach a particular topic? I mean, what kind of other ones where there would be significant differences? I'm imagining they're probably in the area of doctrines like, obviously, the humanity versus deity of Jesus and that kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. I think, as I say, the axiom, the foundation of scriptural reasoning is the understanding and holding of disagreement. And in the context of these texts, I think one reflection that a Christian might have of the Islamic text is the personality of God appears quite different. In regard to what my dear friends have said in relation to God's humility and God's kenosis, his sort of self-emptying as he does so vividly in the New Testament narrative, I think there's relatively little evidence of that in the Quran. I think the underlying message from the narrative around Pharaoh in the Quran is of a man who assumes for himself the place of God. If you do not worship me as a god, I'll throw you in prison. The idea of God as being a humble God, a much more relational God in many respects, is something that is a point perhaps of difference, between a frank difference between an Islamic tradition in relation to its Judeo-Christian sisters. So it's these kind of differences that are sharpened and emphasised through the conversations that we have. I reflecting on the Jewish text, people talk about the Quran and about Islamic law. There's a lot of talk about Islamic law, Sharia, so on and so forth. But in reality, what's emerged for me from my heritage of imamate training and study of the Quran is that for us, much of the law comes from an oral tradition around the Quran, whereas in the Hebrew scriptures, such as we see, the primary text itself gives very clear guidance and very rich guidance without the need quite often for these concentric circles of oral exposition. So, for example, Nehemiah's instruction, it is so vividly pertinent to current affairs, and likewise the structure and the guidance that is provided for the moral and spiritual characteristics that might invest a good leader are something that Muslims certainly can be instructed by, which is one of the reasons reasons, quite frankly, why the Torah, the Islamic tradition, or as we call it, the Israeliyat, generally Jewish stuff, very much informs and is a source of Islamic law and creation of Islamic ideas in the Muslim worlds.
Well, it's been a fascinating time, and I'm so sorry we didn't have more time, because I feel we've only scratched the surface, and that obviously in the context of a normal session there would be a lot more, natural interchange and that sort of thing. But I think it's given us a taster, at least, of what one might expect with a scriptural reasoning session. If people are interested, if it's piqued their interest, whether or not, they agree or disagree or whatever, if they want to find out more, is the best place to do that at the website?
Absolutely. I mean, if the website address, www.scripturalreasoning, all one word, .org.uk. And there are various groups growing up around the UK. We very much welcome people meeting around their kitchen table, and we will do our best to support you. So, yes, it's a free and democratic and egalitarian practice for everybody to get involved in.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, all, for being with me on the programme today. It's been fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you'd like to find out more, as Mohammed said there, scripturalreasoning.org.uk. And I'm putting the links to it with this programme. You can find that there with the podcast ready to be downloaded, if you so wish, at premier.org.uk/unbelievable. I found this really interesting, a bit different to what we normally do here on the programme, but I hope that you found it as informative as I did, and can join me again as we continue our interfaith discussions in the weeks to come. We've got a bit of feedback to your comments on the previous week's shows, so hold on for that as well in a moment's time. In the meantime, my thanks to my guests, and we hope we'll be able to have you in again at some point in the future.
That'll be lovely.
God willing, Justin.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Unbelievable with Justin Brierley.
Well, let me remind you that you can hear one of our guests, namely Mohammed Al-Hussaini, the Imam who joined us on the programme today, at an event called Persecuted Christians, an Imam's Perspective. This is not related to scriptural reasoning specifically, but it looks like a very interesting event if you want to get along there. It's Monday the 24th of August, 6:30pm this year, 2009, and it's at St Augustine's Church, 117 Queensgate, London. And you can find out more at the website nested.org.uk. That's nested.org.uk. So Mohammed speaking on Persecuted Christians and Imam's Perspective this Monday, the 24th of August, 6:30pm at St Augustine's Church in London. Let's go to some of your feedback then, and as usual, the normal address applies if you want to get in touch with anything you heard on the programme today, if you want to respond to the whole idea of doing interfaith debate and discussion in the way that we heard today, at least a snatch of, do get in touch. The normal way is by email. That's unbelievable@premier.org.uk. You can also get in touch via phone, leave me a voicemail message. Happy to play that out in the coming weeks. The voicemail message number 08456 52 52 52 and select option 5. And if you'd like any more information about this programme, about the organisations that we've been hearing about today, it's all there on the Unbelievable webpage at premier.org.uk/unbelievable. You can download this podcast, send it to a friend, and get hold of all kinds of other interesting faith discussion programmes as well. So please do visit that. Just time, I think, to let you know also about the Premier community. If you go to the Unbelievable webpage, you can click through to the Unbelievable group. Loads of discussions going on there. A really vibrant place where a lot of people are contributing. So I wanted to read out one or two of the discussions that are going on at the moment. This one on a recent show where Peter Harty and Peter Williams were debating intelligent design versus evolution. Alan posts on the Unbelievable group a thread, Pete Harty's woeful defence of evolution. And goes on to say things like that he says he knows the name of a fossil which is 1.2 billion years old. How does he manage to get a date like this? We can't carbon date a fossil since the timescale is too large. He must be using the unscientific circular reasoning that sedimentary layers are dated by the fossils found in them, and the fossils are dated by the layers they are found in. How does he know the small collection of bits and pieces of ape and monkey bones and voluminous amounts of plaster and artist drawings are ancestors of humans up to 3 million years old? What dating system is he using? And goes on in similar vein. And he eventually says, I can't think why he says looking for evidence of intelligent design cannot be science. Where is the evidence that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old? This date has been conjured up to suit the long ages required. A newly created Adam could not be dated, although he would look about 30. All the rocks and planets that God created must have apparent age. New lava has been dated at around 1 billion years. Radiometric dating is a supposition and guesswork. Obviously, it's not hard to guess where Alan's coming from on this as a young Earth creationist. I did just take issue at least with one aspect of what you said in your post there, Alan, which was that Pete Harty says that science and God are not compatible. He actually didn't say that in the programme. He certainly said he doesn't believe in intelligent design, but he has said on other occasions too that he doesn't have a problem with people who believe a theistic evolutionary account of the world, and he doesn't hold that that is incompatible with belief in God. He just happens not to believe in God, though he certainly doesn't sort of go to the length that P.Z. Myers and Richard Dawkins and others do in holding an anti-accommodationism stance, as it were. So some interesting response as well coming into that post that he put there. Obviously many atheists responding, Jamie Frost being one. Says if one was to compile a similar list in support of evolution, I'm sure it would be at least 100 times the length, and that's no exaggeration. And to repeat from before, even the Anglican Catholic churches seem sufficiently convinced, so it's hardly likely intelligent design is making some gallant rise that is shaking the foundations of science, although I'm sure many Christians would like to believe that. I had a quick search to find those on the list from my own institution, Oxford University. There were 3, I believe, one of those in a relevant discipline, 3 random PhD students from across many years. Given there are thousands and thousands of academics here, it's hardly an impressive offering, says Jamie. So obviously Jamie not impressed by the claims of intelligent design. Just one of the many stories and threads going on the Unbelievable group there. Also in regard to Unbelievable, another little thread that's reawoken, as it were, having gone to sleep for a while since February, is the one on the cosmic fingerprint of God. Very much a related thing. You may remember back in February we had Perry Marshall, author of a website called the Cosmic Fingerprints, and he was arguing for the DNA, specifically DNA, having to be intelligently designed. Ron Galloway just restarted up on this thread recently, said, my thoughts on the subject of gods. If I bring something home from the shop, I have to find some space to put it, for all the things need space to exist. If someone created space, where would that someone be prior? Nothing exists outside, because there is none even for gods. So though none more than myself would wish it to be so, it's a non-starter. There's no doubt that gods were created as a means of controlling the masses. Do as I say, and your reward is in heaven. Do not, and your reward will be a lake of boiling whatever for eternity. Only one thing is forever. Space is eternal, without beginning or end. It is what it is, was what it is, from everlasting to everlasting, an everlasting energy field that all things come from. All matter is made from small particles making larger, until hydrogen consisting to a massive inferno. Interesting, Ron. Of course, your contention that forever, space is eternal, is not what science actually tells us in terms of the Big Bang Theory, etc. Time and space had a starting point, according to the Big Bang Theory. Paul Wright, though, weighs in as well, another atheist coming in on the whole issue, and responding to Perry Marshall's website in particular, says, why is it always engineers who come up with these green ink websites on their revolutionary new theories? Here's a few things wrong with it. Physics first and philosophy second. Perry says that random mutation maximizes entropy, but ignores natural selection, that is, the effect of the environment on the organism with the mutation. Natural selection leads organisms attempts to acquire information from their environment. You can even show, as David McKay does, on Perry's page, for answering objections, he admits his random mutation generator doesn't include selection, but that somehow thinks that's okay. It isn't, because he's not simulating evolution by natural selection. Dawkins does the real experiment in one of his books. And you say, see the Weasel Programme on Wikipedia. And you go on to say, Perry moves to philosophy with his claim that all codes are designed. But even if you concede that DNA is designed, what does that tell you about the designer? And going back to maths finally, Paul says, if you regard DNA as strong evidence of a designer, you should be very surprised if it turns out that DNA arose naturally, and considerably lower your conviction that there is a designer. Is anyone here willing to say that DNA is such strong evidence? Justin seems to be hedging his bets. God did DNA, but if science explains DNA, well, it obviously wasn't God after all, but God still exists. Unfortunately, if you're equally good at explaining any outcome, you have zero knowledge. That's a result from information theory, says Paul. So, obvious particular point of view there on the whole area of intelligent design, really. Though, if you do want to look for yourself at specifically the things that they're referring to, do check out the programme from back in February called The Cosmic Fingerprints of God. Is DNA evidence for the existence of God? That's at the Unbelievable webpage, along with all our other archive programmes, premier.org.uk/unbelievable. And there's a link there to the website as well that Perry maintains. So my thanks to all who have contributed on the Unbelievable forum. Just time to say that if you want to get involved, then that's always a good place to go. If you want to start a thread, you're welcome. If you want to reply to one, there's loads that are buzzing around there, so feel free to get involved. And finally, to next week. What are we talking about next week? I'll have to remind myself before I can tell you. I'm sure I've got it written down here somewhere. Oh, yes, this is what we're doing. Let me tell you what's coming up on the show at the same time, this time next week.
You're unbelievable.
Well, we're going to be asking, does religion make people unhappy? We're going to be having an atheist and a Christian, so back to a well-known combination here on the show. Barry Duke is the editor of the Freethinker magazine in the UK. Tom Price is a young and up-and-coming apologist with the Damaris Trust and also at the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. So they're going to be discussing this question, does religion make people unhappy? Obviously very much in regard to whether Christianity makes people unhappy. Some atheists say it enslaves, Christians say it frees. We'll be finding out where the evidence lies on next week's programme. Do join me for that, and online